On this show, we're driven by curiosity. We want to chart a path forward. The best people, the best conversations. We're on a journey and it's just getting started. All right, everybody. We are back. I am back off of vacation. It's been an incredible time. A little rusty. I've been off the mic for a few weeks, so as I trip over my words, not too many snickerings, please. I appreciate that. I'm joined today with a very good friend of mine, somebody that I've wanted to talk to for a while. How are you doing, my good buddy, Joshua Steinman?
What's up, Jack?
Hey, good to see you. I'm laughing because we practiced the name in the intro before the show. It's Joshua Steinman, not Josh. Joshua Steinman. Joshua Steinman is an Iraqi war 2-time vet, a startup veteran, and a veteran of the National Security Administration or National Security Council in the Trump administration. Was there all 4 years. Not too many people made it all 4 years there, Mr. Steinman. So congratulations on that. And thank you very much for your service across all those domains.
Thanks, Jack. That was a lot of fun.
We're going to get into all of that and a whole lot more. But the first thing I want to do is just sort of set the stage for everybody to understand who we're talking to. You very deliberately cultivated a low profile, if I remember, during the Trump administration. Like I said, you were there all 4 years. You didn't get embroiled in too many controversies. You didn't have your head up too far to get run over by the lawnmower, I think, which was a very effective strategy. You made it 4 years. You got a lot of things done. And I want to give people some context about you so that when we get to the meat of all of this conversation, it'll have some resonance for people. So let's start off with your military service. You're a 2-time Iraqi vet. How did you get into the military? Why did you join? Where did you serve, etc.? Start off with that.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So I can't go into a lot of detail, but essentially I was recruited out of college into an interesting corner of the United States Navy. And originally I had a very strange academic background and had come to the attention of some folks that wanted to use that on the civilian side. I just sort of didn't really want to go and sit behind a desk. And so I applied to be a surface warfare officer, the guys driving the ships in the Navy, because at least I knew I could be someone that's going out and doing things, taking action, which is just what I wanted. And from there, I got pulled into just an interesting corner of the Navy that kind of exists, kind of doesn't exist anymore. But that put me on the ground in Iraq twice, just doing really interesting work. And it was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Can't talk too much about it. Can't share too much. But you went on 2 different tours, according to your biography, and it did lead you a little bit down the path of where you ended up with the White House, right? I mean, but you didn't go directly from military service into the White House, did you? What did you do in between?
Yeah, so when I wasn't deployed or training, I got pulled into this interesting group of military officers and enlisted folks that were advising the senior officer in the United States Navy about asymmetric military opportunities. So we were charged with looking for ways in which we could win the next conflict by the Chief of Naval Operations, who's the senior officer in the United States Navy. And so I had a technology background both in college and before, and then this weird counterterrorism background as well. And so for these times when I was not actually training or abroad, we'd be working on building out interesting projects directly for the Chief of Naval Operations. And so one of the projects that I worked on was how to more rapidly integrate emerging technologies into naval operations. And so I wrote a paper for the Chief of Naval Operations that ended up getting circulated also to the director of the NSA and other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Those are the service chiefs. So the CNO is one service chief. Then you have the Army Chief of Staff, the Air Force Chief of Staff, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and then depending on time of war, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and now the Chief of Staff of the Space Force. Those are the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I wrote a paper saying that essentially we needed to better have a better interface with Silicon Valley. So I wrote a paper, and that paper ended up getting briefed. I mean, I briefed it to a few of them, and then it got briefed around, and that turned into the Defense Innovation Unit, which is a pretty well-known and now very successful military unit out in Silicon Valley on Moffett Field that helps serve as that interface. And so I left naval service shortly thereafter, went out to Palo Alto, joined an early stage cybersecurity startup that had just gotten out of an accelerator called Y Combinator. And then at the same time, remained affiliated with the Navy in a reserve capacity. I'd been active duty for about 7, 8 years. And then in a reserve capacity, helped stand up the Defense Innovation Unit. And so that was what I was doing in between the Navy and then being asked to come back to serve on the National Security Council staff.
There you go. How did you get involved specifically with the Trump campaign or Trump administration? Why did they pick you? Why did they pick you, Josh? I know that there's been a number of articles written that ask that very same question. Who the heck is this Joshua Steinman guy, and why is he on the National Security Council? How did that happen? People want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know.
So an old boss of mine, who I built, history of trust and competence with, asked me to come back and help them just do the staffing during the transition. And I think this is a good lesson for your viewers and really for anybody that Scott Adams talks about this, a skill stack. And so having the ability to have these like basic skills, like how do you process a large amount of information? How do you identify necessary skills, people, et cetera? How do you sort things? How do you target people? I took a leave of absence from the startup where I was running operations there. I don't know, at a larger company, I would have been called the COO. We really didn't have titles. The company was like 25, 30 people. And so I took a leave of absence, couch surfed in DC with friends, and was working on the transition team. And whenever there's a new administration, you have thousands of people that throw their hat in the ring and say, hey, I want to work, I want this job, I want that. You have people calling saying you have to hire this person, et cetera. And so they needed someone who could just like be that person who took all those phone calls, processed all that paperwork, sorted people into buckets, and then also at the same time acted as a sort of confidential advisor to the people making the decisions about who to hire. And it was very resource constrained. I think there were only going to be about 15 people hired onto the National Security Council staff. And so basically I just ran paper flow for a month and a half as not me, I didn't identify anyone. I basically sorted, racked, and stacked potential candidates for all these jobs. And literally, it was just the jobs that no one wanted to do, meaning like they didn't want to sort the paper. Everyone wanted the jobs on the National Security Council staff. I was the guy that someone was like, we trust this guy. He's competent. He can read, he can manage a spreadsheet, do all these things, make phone calls, make people come in and take an interview, the whole thing, record our thoughts on the interview, rack and stack. So basically, I just spent a month helping out an old boss of mine who, I had a lot of faith in. And yeah, did that for a month and a half. And then in early January, they were looking at a few of the remaining gaps that they had. And they didn't have any candidates they liked to run the cyber technology portfolio on the National Security Council staff. And this old mentor, boss of mine, basically pulled me aside and was like, I know you're planning on going back to Silicon Valley, but we have two potential candidates for this job. One is this person, and they didn't have much confidence that person was going to be good at the job. And he said, the other one's you. So, you pick. Who do you want to have the job? And, I didn't really know much about that sort of stuff. Didn't know much about policy. I mean, I'd been on the ground and I knew many of the challenges, but, I'd never thought about serving in that type of a role, at least in the short term. And I had a nice life back in Palo Alto. But I knew some of the big problems that needed to be solved, and I figured, I had enough confidence in myself to be able to take those on. And so I said, okay, I'll do it.
Well, I appreciate that sentiment of saying, look, I know what the problems are. I've got a nice life. I like my life. Setting up shop, semi-permanently in Washington, D.C., going under the gun, working the crazy hours, all of the stress, the responsibility, the burden of service and leadership. I can understand why you wouldn't want to do it. People ask me all the time, like, hey, are you going to run? Are you going to do this? Are you going to be a senator? Heck, you could run for president. And I'm like, no, just no. But I can feel, though, the pain of not serving becoming greater than the pain of serving, right? And I think that that's at one point, people who want to lead, people who don't really want to get involved understand that they need to lead. And that is sort of the circumstance I can see here. You saw the need, you saw the problems, you had a nice life, and you're like, okay, I'll do it. What were the big problems that you had identified going into it? And could you just clearly define, please, your role on the National Security Council? Give us a title and the role and what it means. Because you know what? I'll tell you, outside of these inner circles in D.C., nobody knows what the heck the National Security Council really does or really is. So could you just give us a couple minutes on that to educate the guys out there?
Yeah, too easy. So the National Security Council is actually a meeting. It's like a board of directors meeting for the United States government. So when people say the National Security Council, they're actually talking about a meeting of the president and specific members of the cabinet to decide the members of the cabinet are making a recommendation to the president, who then makes a decision. That's the actual National Security Council. Those members of the cabinet are like the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury. They're actually laid out in a document that every president signs at the beginning of their administration. The National Security Council staff are the team of people in the White House. It's an office inside the White House that manages the paper flow of that decision-making process, and then at the same time manages the more junior levels of that process. So, for example, per the Constitution, the unitary theory of government, the president can literally make any decision he wants that falls within the purview of the executive branch. Any decision, right? You have people that work for the State Department, and in almost all cases, the president could walk into an office in the State Department, pick up a sheet of paper, literally make a decision, and be like, this is what we're doing. And it's like, that's the legal thing that he can do. That's not how things work in practice, right? We have all these employees, we have appointees, all this stuff. But when so the first line meetings are called policy or sub PCCs, policy coordination committee meetings, run by people that would work for me on the National Security Council staff. And my official job title was Senior Director for Cyber. I also had what's called a commission, and that's a document signed by the president that literally vested me with a small portion of the executive authority delegated by the president. So I held two ranks during my 4 years. First, I was a special assistant to the president. That's the lowest of the three ranks of the commissioning certificates that you can get in the White House. I was a special assistant to the president, and then about 2 years in, I was promoted to deputy assistant to the president. So, for example, the National Security Advisor or the White House Chief of Staff usually hold one rank above that, which is assistant to the president. So you have assistant to the president, deputy assistant to the president, special assistant to the president. All in all, there's maybe 150 commissions in the White House. And so, and those people literally have a sheet of paper from the president that says, on national security matters, I vest you with a portion of my authority delegated to do certain things. So like I could literally go around the world, and did on occasions, and act on behalf of the president, limited capacity. But day to day, what that means is that I would hold meetings between assistant secretaries and undersecretaries, and sometimes deputy assistant secretaries across these agencies that were fighting about what to do about something. And if we could resolve those disagreements, we would be able to move out and just execute. But if there was a disagreement there, me my team would basically write up a paper, say, this is the district, and then we would staff that paper around to the deputy secretaries of the dependencies. So that meeting would be chaired by the Deputy National Security Advisor, who would bring in the deputy secretaries of the departments of Energy and Treasury and Commerce and Defense, and they would try and resolve the disagreement. If they couldn't resolve that disagreement, it would go up to the secretaries. That meeting was called the Principals Committee meeting. That meeting was chaired by the National Security Advisor. And again, the goal here is to resolve differences and or pass a recommendation to the president, who gets to make the ultimate decision. And so what you have is this like sort of escalating process. And people actually don't often want to take decisions to the president, if only because it's a hard meeting to get. It's often that they want to keep those options to go to the boss very close to their chest and only use them for the things that they really care about. So there's this incredible downward pressure inside the executive branch to resolve things at the lowest level. And so NSC staffers essentially are these high-level traffic cops that can both help guide and execute high-level decisions, as well as frame issues for decision by the deputy secretaries of these departments, the secretaries of these departments, and then ultimately the president of the United States.
That sounds like a challenging job. Trying to resolve differences in like agency differences and differences in opinions of cabinet members and their staff on matters of national security interests of the highest level, right? The highest level. These are not mundane matters. These are things that are impacting everybody and the future. And the work that you do there is building the infrastructure and the institution that actually is going to carry on after you leave. Now, I want to talk about your legacy there at some point, but could you just identify some of the big problems that you had seen before you took the job? Did they change once you got into the work? And what was your takeaway still then of like the biggest issues that were in your portfolio that are still outstanding?
Yeah, so I came in, I took the job because I basically wrote out on a small index card 6 problems that I wanted to address. And then within a few days, I'd written those up on a whiteboard in my office. Very small. White House offices are really small office. And so I wrote these 6 issues up on my whiteboard, and I said to myself, I'm going to take a run at all 6 things, and we'll see where I get. And I knew what, in my mind, resolutions looked like. And so I can't go into all of them, but for example, one was like make sure that we have a free and open global telecommunications infrastructure. And so I was in charge of all telecom policy and 5G policy for the whole government, and then all of our engagement abroad. And so that was one major issue that I felt needed my attention. I came in to try and address, and I think we did pretty well. Another was the way in which we do things in cyberspace. I can't talk much about it, but I can just tell you that we revised many of those practices, and we're doing quite well. There were a few other things like the human resources challenges in cyberspace, where individual contributors can have an outsized impact. And we did a bunch of stuff there. But the whole point was that I had 6 goals. I wrote them down. I was very open with everyone about what I was there to do. And every day that I would get frustrated or, angry or think that, oh, maybe I'm going to get fired tomorrow. The whole point was that I was still in the job, and every day meant that it was a day that I could come in and work on those 6 problems. And until I either got fired or finished them, I wasn't going to stop. And so I ended up lasting all 4 years.
We would have lunch and talk to each other and catch up throughout. And I got to say, I was almost surprised every time you said you were still there, and not because you were going to get fired, but just because of the grind, because of the pressure, because of the administrative roadblocks, because of the ever changing cast of characters. because of dealing, with people coming in and people leaving. And I'll leave out the names for now, but Bolton, McMaster, oh wait, sorry. And like those things are, can be very challenging. And I just want to say on a personal level, thank you very much for sticking it out, dude. There were definitely times where I was like, man, how, why? I don't even get it anymore. But you really stuck it out, and that perseverance paid off. And do you feel, I mean, you stayed, which means maybe you accomplished the things you want to accomplish. Maybe you didn't. That's why you stayed. But all in all, when you look back on those 4 years, what's your rating? What's your rating? Your self-performance?
I checked off the 6th item on my to-do list at 5:45 p.m. on January 19th, 2021, with an executive order that was one of the last that President Trump signed. All 6 are done.
Congratulations, man. I really appreciate that. Way to stick to it. And we're going to talk about the spirit and the energy that gets somebody to stick to things like that and to persevere in face of adversity. And when you're like one against, I don't know, 200,000 people trying to fight you and trying to get your accomplishments through. But there was something that you brought up beforehand that I wanted to drill down on as I was thinking about it. You were on the transition team. You said you were, quote, racking and stacking binders full of people. People. Yeah. And
I'd say people.
Candidates, highly qualified candidates of all kinds, shapes and sizes, colors and creeds. And I think one of the main criticisms that people can levy fairly at the Trump administration is a mishandling of the hiring process and the appointees, and the failure to basically put loyalists in all of the positions of power within DC. As somebody who saw the lists, the names, the resumes, the applicants, the stream of people, was it what was the breakdown from the idea that we need to fully staff to not being able to? A, is that a fair criticism? And B, if it was it a lack of qualified applicants? Was it a lack of energy to hire the right people? A strategic lack of foresight? Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So first things first, I think a duly elected president deserves a staff that are dedicated to executing the policy platform that they ran on. I think that the people that made their way into the Trump administration did not fulfill that in many cases. Some did, but many did not. And we would see that pretty regularly where, the president would say something, and essentially as that cascaded down through the apparatus, people would either actively or passively say, we're not going to do that. It was incredibly frustrating and essentially led me to just keep a running list in my head of, and I kid you not, there were less than 50 people that I fully trusted to be affirmatively, actively, proactively executing against the lawful orders of the President of the United States. In terms of a little bit more detail, I'm going to keep all that private. I've got lessons learned, and the 50 of us that were in that space, and we all knew who we were. We know how to fix it if there's another opportunity. But suffice it to say, I think it's advice that any duly elected president, deserves that, and I don't think President Trump had that. And I think it just goes to the fact that personnel is policy, and a lot of people have been saying that, but it really is true. I mean, there were things where I would get paper coming across my desk saying, hey, we're going to make an international statement at this conference at the G7, who knows what. We're going to say this thing at the G7, and I would read the text of the U.S. statement, and it would be like, I don't know who wrote this. Maybe this person doesn't listen to what the president says. Maybe they haven't read the speeches. That's fine. But the ideas contained within this document are not the ideas of the president of the United States. And therefore, I'm not going to clear this piece of paper. And sometimes it would be like literally only me on its way up to the national security advisor. I remember several examples where this happened. And I literally be like, I'm not clearing this. Sorry. And, you know, the bureaucracy, thank God, uh, they love their process. And you'd get senior people from agencies calling me, calling my assistant, calling my team, under this. I'd be very clear. I'd be like, this doesn't represent the policy that's been given to us by the president of the United States. I'm not going to sign off on this. Like, if you want to sign off on this and have my name be on there saying does not approve, like, that's fine. But, like, you don't get my moral sanction or bureaucratic blessing to say this because it's not what the boss wants to say. Um, and that happened a lot. And there were just not many people that were willing to do that. And, part of this is like this moral issue of like what I felt comfortable doing. I knew I could always go back to Silicon Valley, and I'd started a few companies before then. I knew I could, land on my feet no matter what happened. And so it's like you come in every day to that office, to those types of jobs, saying like, win or lose, I'm leaving it all on the field. And there's nothing that can stop me from doing what I think is the right thing to do, which the right thing to do is always what you've been given the direction to do by the president of the United States.
Right. Well, I appreciate that sort of fortitude in the face of what must be an immense amount of pressure. It brings up a question to me, which is, how do people know what the president wants? And it sounds almost like a stupid question, but how was that communicated? You said maybe they didn't read the speech, maybe they didn't read the paper, but like, how are people supposed to know aside from public like, what is the process?
Mm-hmm. So it's different, and this is where there's a term that there's a term that I learned when I was in the military called malicious compliance.
Mm.
And I heard stories that under previous administrations, people would scour the speeches of a president to find policy direction. And they would say, oh, there's a speech here. It says this. Let's go do that, right? We've been told by the president to go do that. Under this administration, essentially, unless directed nearly by name, a lot of the bureaucracy attempted to just say, we haven't been told, so we're just going to go with the last order given by the previous administration or previous administrations. And so, I think that, again, coming back to this core idea that a duly elected president deserves to be served by officers, commissioned or otherwise, throughout the whole federal bureaucracy, who are in good faith executing the orders and direction given. I would take speeches, tweets, and take those as direction, right? Unless countermanded, right? If there's one document that says one thing and another that says another, you take the most recent one. You say, look, this is what we've been told to do. In the case where you need some sort of resolution, I would go ask. I mean, I worked at the White House. I could go ask the Deputy National Security Advisor, the National Security Advisor, get some clarity, some direction. But we would write these high-level strategy documents and coordinate them out of the NSC. They'd be blessed off on by every member of the cabinet. And those often served as like the big anvil against which we would pound. But then for the smaller things, yeah, you take a speech, you take a comment made, or sometimes, the president would go to your boss, the National Security Advisor, and say, hey, I want X to happen. And that person would then call, the National Security Advisor might call me in and say, and you'd never know, right? Because you always want to insulate the president. But the National Security Advisor would be like, hey, why don't you go do X? Always within the bounds of legality and propriety. God, I probably talked with my lawyers 3 to 5 times a day in that job. So nothing weird or squirrely. But yeah, and then you'd go do X because your boss, an assistant to the president, vested with, commissioned by the president of the United States, would say, hey, we're going to go do this. Like, go lay the groundwork for X. And so that was how I did it. I think that's how most administrations did it. But it also is sort of some of the challenges that we faced.
It's good talking to you, man. And I hope people listening are getting some of the same sense that I'm getting, which is that, no matter where you are in life, no matter what you're working on, no matter what organization, government, private, anywhere, man, people, human beings are still involved, right? And like nothing is ever perfect. There are judgments you have to make on the fly. People aren't great at communicating. People think what's in their head or not. And uh, you know, when I first got out of college, I thought my first job was going to be filled with people who were just brilliant and hardworking and totally focused and on mission. Like, boy, what a rude awakening that was. And as I just get older and more mature and older and more mature, I realize it's the same. It's the same thing everywhere. There's human beings everywhere, and there's varying levels of competence and varying levels of professionalism, varying levels of preparedness. But to realize that you have to still manage all of that kind of nonsense at the highest levels of government, dealing with counter terrorism and cybersecurity and national security issues, it's kind of scary. It's a little scary, but it's also just reality that people need to understand. And it's so easy to just be like a MAGA red meat table pounder and be like, why did this happen? Blah, 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 or do this. But man, life's complicated. Things are hard. And as you said, personnel is policy. Personnel is productivity. Personnel is your product. Personnel is your profit. Personnel is everything.
And let me just jump in because I think, Jack, you've highlighted something that is incredibly important, which is that, many people in the Twitter world, they like this book Dune by Frank Herbert. Fear is the mind killer. It's this probably the famous line from that book. And it's true. It really is true. And it's not just fear, but it's misperception. And it's this misperception that someone's coming for you or planning or plotting or this or that. And I found that 90% of the time it was usually just miscommunications. People didn't understand what one thing meant. They see a little slice of something and they're like, oh, that person's coming to get me or whatever. Not true. And the point is that when you're in these types of environments or when you're leading people, when you have the privilege to lead people in these environments, and I led some amazing people. My team was fluctuating between 8 and 12 people, world class, all of them. And when you're leading people or when you're operating in these environments, you always have to sort of, Naval talks about this beginner's mind, like you have to have it. You have to always approach these problems like you're acting in good faith and so are the other people. And what that means is you owe them and the process open communication, clarity of thought, directness. I told my team, I don't want to see you at your desks. They'd be like, well, my job's at the desk. I send emails. I said, no, you go talk to someone face to face. I don't care if it means you take a car across town. You go talk to them face to face. If for whatever reason you can't talk to them face to face, you call them on the phone. Email is last resort. Because let me tell you, so many of these problems get resolved if you just realize that it's a communication problem, right? You have to be open. You have to be direct. Tell people what you're trying to achieve. I put it up on my whiteboard. 6 things I'm trying to do. Not every single, probably a good 70% of people that came into my office would remark about the fact that, like in big, bold letters on this whiteboard, staring people who walked in right in the face, these are the 6 things that I'm here to do. And by the way, the president essentially blessed off on all of them through various ways. So it's like, what I'm gunning for, right? Like, let's talk about it.
Communication. I do remember very vividly watching The Apprentice, and Donald Trump himself said, email is for pussies. I mean, maybe not in that exact term. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. And
Yeah.
it really
It's easy.
Really is
it's
powerful.
a cop out.
It is.
It's a cop, like all these times when you don't want to talk to someone or when you don't want to go see them, it's often because of this fear. Right? You have this fear, oh, maybe the person's not going to want to do this thing that I want to do, or maybe it's not going to work out, or who knows what. I'll just send an email and then I want it to think about it. You have to keep that in check.
Mm. I'm reminded of a story about miscommunication and also about the human element of government and about the far reaching implications and effects that human behavior has on government and policy. I won't name any names, but I was listening to a Bush era speechwriter talk about this Bush second inaugural and how in the Bush second inaugural, he says very clearly that the goal of American foreign policy is now to end tyranny around the world. And the guy who was working for Bush, writing speeches at the time for Bush, was like, where the hell did that come from? What? Because how powerful and important of a statement was that to set American foreign policy and ending tyranny around the world? And there wasn't even like complete agreement in the office about that. And it just gets spoken, and then people refer to the speech, and then policy gets made based upon it. And then eventually what, hundreds of thousands of people die. Hundreds of thousands of people die, maybe millions. Who knows? It's crazy to just think about the human element in what we're doing here, in government and in everything. And communication is very important, and acting without fear is very important. I want to talk about something you said earlier about processing large pools of information as well, too. You said that was a skill that you have. What does that mean? What kind of skill is that? In my experience, I've heard this called maybe ideation, right? Like being able to process huge amounts of information and bring it back to something actionable or intelligent or something useful. What do you mean by that? Where did you learn about that? Is that a skill that can be taught? Let's move away from
Yeah.
the nuts and bolts of the administration a little bit and into some more personal stuff. Like, what do you mean by that? More applicable for folks as well, too.
Yeah, I think, again, Scott Adams talks about this in How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big, systems over goals. And so it's sort of there are building blocks here. The previous reference, I was literally talking about the ability to just create a spreadsheet, understand that like I'm going to have certain fields that I need to put in that spreadsheet: name, current job, salary expectation, and then maybe like three major skills, and then just know like, okay, I'm going to be brutally honest and evaluate these candidates from 1 to 5, 5 being the best, right? And literally just create any system. Doesn't need to be perfect. Something I learned in the Navy during one of my courses that I went through, where they're teaching you how to avoid capture, or when captured, how to resist that interrogation. That you have to make decisions quickly, right? If you don't make decisions quickly, you're dead. You're dead or you're captured. And it doesn't matter if they're the right decision, because the wrong decision is no decision. And so creating a system for being able to filter large amounts of information, it's just about like, just create any system and stick to it. And then at some point, like come back a week later, 2 weeks later, if you have that much time, and just be like, hey, can we improve this system at all? Oh, yeah, let's add another field. Great, fine, move on. Add another field, make it better, but make a decision. So for information processing, it's like know how to use Excel, right? Recognize reality. Like, don't give everybody a 5 because you get the trophy for showing up. That's bullshit. Just recognize reality. Like, is this person a good communicator? Yes or no? Yes. Are they like one of the top 10% that you've seen? No. Okay, well, give them a 4, give them a 3. Great. And so having these like core capabilities, and in a digital world, that can be something as simple as like being able to type fast, or being able to use Excel, being able to use a computer without taking your hands off the keyboard. Basic things compound. And so information processing for me means a group of skills that are sort of digitally resident, right? Like know how to batch information, process it quickly, but also cognitive tool sets as well. Even if it's just cultivating the ability to try and determine reality, which is tough. I I wish more people were better at it. I won't make any large generalizations, but I wish more people were better at it. And so you add all those things together, and you don't need to be the best. And Scott says this in the book. Like, you don't need to be world class, like one of the top 5 in 10 categories. You need to be in the top 20% of 5 categories. Because when you're in the top 20% of 5 categories of skills, it becomes a very small world, right? So, like, think of it in terms of, not to go back to this scenario we were talking about, but who had the ability to process large amounts of information and do person to person interviews? Probably a lot of people. Maybe I'm in the top 20% there. Use digital tools to surface that information in a quick and meaningful way. Okay, probably a lot of people do that too. Understand the national security complex to some degree as a former military officer and startup founder in the tech space. So, okay, now we're getting into a small pool. Know the players and understand the policy priorities of, and by the way, you just keep doing this for like 3 or 4 more skills, you're down to like 5 people in the world. And it wasn't like that I was world class on any of those things. But as Scott says, it's a skill stack, right? And even if they're like very strange skills that you have, like that stack differentiates you. And there's not just one stack that you can have. You can have multiple stacks, or the stacks can sort of overlap, or it can be that you have 20 of them and 7 of them mean that you have a very unique position in a network. But what I tell people today is, like, if you're interested in something, it's worth paying attention to, it's worth learning about, and it's worth, dipping a toe in and gaining some competence around it. If only because you like it. And when you like something, you're going to pay attention a lot better. But then you never know when it's going to pay off.
Man, you said a lot of great stuff there. There's a lot to react to. One quick one I'm going to note on is these names: Naval, Scott Adams. There's other names that we could throw out there. I just want the world to understand that, like, all these people that you see on Twitter that are influential and that write books and whatever, people in the actual White House read these folks and are influenced by them, right? I just want people to be aware that this is an ecosystem, and these ideas are being generated and bounced around and improved upon and iterated. And it actually has real world influence that transcends Twitter, transcends social media, transcends any of those conversations, really does have impact. I mean, to me, I've come to understand this, but I'm not sure to the extent at which other people understand just how powerful a lot of these media and influencers are, not in the sense that they're controlling anybody, but in the sense that, like, it spurs you to think. It spurs you to consider certain things and certain worldviews and perspectives. Now, this thing that you're talking about, speed and decision-making and making sense of reality, to me, this is around the subject of sense-making, right? Sense-making involves, one, being in a position where you're physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally sound, first of all. You can't make sense of the world if you're triggered. And everybody is triggered basically at this point in time by design, right? So if you're not actively putting up anti-triggering defense, you're not in a position where you're being able to accurately perceive the world and make rapid decisions that lead you into the right place. Making a decision gives you information that inactivity does not. And so this is something I want people to really understand. I talked about this with Joe Norman earlier, maybe a couple episodes ago, complex system scientist. Start with a fuzzy picture of where you're going and take action. Take action, get feedback, reorient, make a new decision, and act, right? It's OODA loop stuff. Were you trained on that in the military? Were you trained in the OODA loop and decision-making and that kind of thing? Is that something you brought in on your own? Where did you learn this? Am I even in the right place here? I mean, the OODA loop keeps coming up in almost every conversation that I'm having with everybody on every subject. Okay.
Yep.
And one of the most recent prime examples, and we don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, is in Afghanistan. John Robb has called it the OODA shear, meaning that the Biden administration is unable to execute their OODA loop because the Taliban is processing and iterating and taking new decisions and new action more quickly than the Biden administration. So OODA loop is everywhere. Jordan Hall says you got to OODA the OODA. He who iterates the most, iterates the fastest, wins. How were you introduced to this idea Did you get trained on it? Have you studied it? Have you put it into practice? Do people around you in administration talk about it? Do people talk about it in the startup world? Let's OODA, buddy.
Yeah, yeah. So Boyd, who I've long been a fan of, and many of my friends and mentors are in the small clique of folks that read and write about Boyd, and in some cases worked for Boyd. Um, I was in this small cadre of folks inside the military that were tasked with finding asymmetric opportunities. And when you start thinking about how to do that, you inevitably, inside that apparatus, come back to John Boyd and the acolytes, the people that worked for him, the people that designed cutting edge weapon systems. And so, yeah, and even I did some writing on this very early, about technology, policy, and iteration back in, like, I don't know, 2014 or something, 2015, talking about how that stuff really matters. Anyway, yeah, the entry level, the gateway drug here is the Robert Coram biography of John Boyd, which I recommend. The PhD level stuff is you go all the way up to there's like really bad video, not bad, but it's like poor quality video of him giving I believe it's like a 10-hour presentation that he used to give, at the Pentagon, in person only, about his theory of warfare. And so, it's a mindset, it's a way of thinking about how you think, about how you make decisions. That's a very abstract thing to say. But yeah, it's deeply impacted the way in which I think about the world. But it's also, Boyd isn't asserting something that isn't natural. He's taking words and he's taking concepts and he's putting them against things, ideas, behaviors that lead to success. He's observing. He asks, why did this work? Why did these people succeed? Why did these other people fail? He's picking that apart. This sort of Tim Ferriss mindset, right? He's analyzing these types of things. And he's extrapolating out of them over the course of his career what led to military success, operational success, technical success. And he's building out this philosophy. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I was certainly drawn to it when I first started reading about Boyd, after either my first or second deployment. But yeah, ever since then, it is a tool, a mindset, a way of thinking that can shape and form the way in which you think about new topics or think about current events.
For us inside the liminal order, we try to just observe and orient really fast and just decide and act even more quickly than that. We ship everything at 80%. We iterate and go, iterate and go, iterate and go. We don't wait to make anything perfect. As Joe Norman said, we set a fuzzy picture and just take action and get that feedback and take more action and get that feedback. And what I have discovered is that, and I think other people have said as much in theory for sure, but in practice, I've discovered that in the time that you could go from 0 to making this perfect thing, if you just go to 80%, 80%, 80%, 80%, you get way farther down the line, way more developed product, a better outcome, than if you're just sitting around trying to make it perfect from the jump. And so it's a difficult mindset to adopt, actually, when you're sort of taught, like, you got to get 100% on this paper, to get an A or whatever. No one ever says you should be aiming for a C+ every time, right? With 80%. But I have found that C+, 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 C+ adds up to an A+ over time. Whereas taking all this effort to make it perfect doesn't. And those who are able to observe, orient, decide, and act more quickly appear to have a distinct advantage in this information environment. And I suspect that this is not going to change. This trend is going to deepen. And if you can't adopt this attitude, this mindset of decision making, of acting to learn, right? Like, you're uncertain, take an action, learn something.
Yep.
I remember working for a hedge fund in the late 90s, and we traded obscure assets, emerging market sovereign debt, like Brazilian debt and Brady bonds and stuff like that. And it was just a few people who traded these assets. And in order to figure out what was going on in the market that day, my portfolio manager would just put something up for sale.
Yep.
Not that he even wanted to really sell it. He just wanted to see what would happen. Who's out there, and his manager would come by and be, why are you selling that? He's like, dude, we just have to figure out who's out there, what the market is like. So you guys out there, you can apply this to your day-to-day life. Like, if you're trying to build a business, if you're trying to start a new product, if you're trying to launch this or that or the other, just start and get that feedback so that you can make it better the next time and act more quickly. Now, speaking of startup stuff and decision-making, you mentioned, well, I know you're working on a startup right now. And we're going to talk about that. But you mentioned also Y Combinator before. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what Y Combinator is and what your experience was there? Because that's a very fascinating, interesting thing that they got going on there.
Yeah. So just to be clear, I didn't go through YC. I joined a company 1 week after that founder finished YC.
Gotcha.
And so I wouldn't want anyone to take away the wrong impression. But basically, it is a startup incubator, which is to say it is a place where people that are starting companies can apply to. And if they get accepted, they go for some period of time. And it's a few weeks. And during that time, there are lectures, there are office hours, and then there's a lot of practice sessions where people practice pitching their startup. But there's an incredible focus at YC specifically, by all accounts. Again, I haven't gone, maybe would like to, but anyway, there's incredible focus on test, iteration, and growth. And so, again, this is where I come back to the Boyd mindset. It's not that John Boyd, it's not that he invented the OODA loop. He invented the phrasing, which is a really interesting mental tool that allows us to quickly grasp the concepts. But the point is that other people have come to these same conclusions as well. And the YC folks are a group of them. Silicon Valley as a whole is a group of folks that have also come to conclude that, so for example, move fast and break things, right, which is this famous Facebook motto, is essentially of the same generative function of OODA loop. Generative function meaning that it's like the thing that generates the words move fast and break things is a reflection of reality that also generates the phrase observe, orient, decide, act. It's the same mindset. It's if you understand reality, if you know possibilities and where things might go, and you're able to quickly sort of filter that information and then make a quick decision and then act on it, like, positive things will accrue. It's the same generative function. So like YC, again, another place where, and it's interesting because a lot of these mindsets, a lot of these concepts do come out of, in some way, shape, or form, the military industrial complex and the people that came out of it from both the interwar period and the post-war period. And so you can read books like Tuxedo Park. You can read books about whether it's like early NASA, the Robert Conquest stuff, or a whole bunch of things that you can read. And what you'll see is that those people had a clear scientific mind that understood things very quickly and tried to make improvements very quickly. So, like, how do you get to the point where the space shuttle, or not the space shuttle program, but like the Apollo program goes from 0 to nothing in a number of months? It's because you have a whole bunch of people dedicated to the recognition of reality and the pursuit of a goal with very little sort of left and right lateral limits in between, where it's just like, we're going to try this thing. Does it work or does it not work? Factual observation you can make, move on to the next, move on to the next, move on to the next. And those people were very tightly tied into the emergent semiconductor industry out in Silicon Valley, nascent computer industry, nascent software industry. I'm moving through time here. And so, again, many of these things come out of these communities, which had, some generation in this national. It is sort of an outgrowth of that, and Silicon Valley is too. There's a great history of Silicon Valley and its connection with the defense apparatus. And I just say this as an observation, not a value statement, but they do come out of very similar places.
Startup work is fascinating to me. The Liminal Order is a startup. It is also a tech startup. It's a community startup. It's a network startup. There's so many elements of what you're talking about apply to what we're doing, what I'm doing personally. I'm interested in what you're doing personally now. I've been reading your Twitter, and you're clearly on a push, man. What is this push that you're on? Because you're marking it in days. You're really grinding. You're holding yourself accountable publicly by posting to Twitter every single day. What are you working on right now? What do you do when you go from two-time Iraq vet doing things in the Navy you can't tell me about to working on the National Security Council, doing things that you can't tell me about, doing 4 years of time in the Trump administration and coming out? Where are you landing, and how are you taking all these lessons that you've learned in all these different domains? And now that you're a little bit older, even though you shaved and you look younger, what lessons did you take? How are you taking them? How are you applying them? What are you doing? What's going on, Joshua Steinman? What are you doing right now?
So esoterically, I've realized that it's very useful for me to look at places where there's stored potential energy in the world, in the universe. Stored potential energy meaning like there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening at a nexus, at a certain like Schelling point, some people like to say recently. It's like the new in phrase. And often those places of stored potential energy are places where you can pursue solutions to interesting problems. They're places where interesting people are going to hang out. And so for many years, at this point, almost the better part of a decade, 7-8 years now, the problems around the fact that we have connected a significant portion of our industrial infrastructure to computers and therefore then to the internet, it's building. These problems are building, that we're connecting, water treatment facilities, meat packing plants, gas pipelines, cars to the internet. And a bunch of friends of mine are very deeply involved in this space. I became deeply involved in this space. It's one of the things that was on my to-do list, buying down these risks. And so, me and some friends that are just world-class experts in this space are building a company to buy down that risk in a way that is, I don't want to say novel, but it sort of takes this big data type approach and systemic approach. So we're going to launch. I'll launch it in the next few days, probably the next 2 weeks. And for folks that warning, shilling ahead. For folks that want to follow me, they can follow me on Twitter. That's at Joshua Steinman.
Oh, hold on. Let's put up on the screen. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Bingo. And then my Substack is just my last name, steinman.substack.com. So yeah, we're going to launch a company in the next few weeks, publicly. Say the name and a little description of what we're doing. But actually, getting back to your question about why am I doing all this stuff, it really actually ties in quite nicely to your conversation about Boyd, which is that one of my very oldest and best friends, who's also what you could call a Boydian, and very sharp guy. Silicon Valley, went straight to tech after college. For years, we've been talking about Boyd and applying these concepts to the act of creating a new company. And so I'm really just sort of living those values now on Twitter with this. People say, oh, building in public. That to me is self-referential. It's kind of myopic. It's not accurate. What it is I'm taking these lessons learned and executing on them and starting a company. And he and I were thinking very deeply about this a few months ago, and essentially came to this conclusion that we were going to make a go at using these meta tools. I was going to use these meta tools to try and see if it would produce the advantages that it produces in warfare in starting a company. And the answer is unequivocally yes. And so I've gone from, a small group of people knew what I was doing, small group of people interested in coming out and working, and very talented, right? Great angel investors, great VCs that knew me personally through my extended network that I'd talked to, talented engineers that knew me through my network. But the minute that I started going public about these things, the cascade comes. Random people, investors, talent just start coming out of the woodwork because they see through their own observation and orientation networks, they see what's going on. And they're tapped into that sense making apparatus about, like, hey, this is a big challenge. We should be thinking about it. I want to go there and work on this problem. And I mean, today I get about 1 to 3 cold inbound from investors, potential customers, or potential team members just through Twitter, email, LinkedIn, because in 4 months, I've just decided to be as reasonably open as I can be around this. And there are some downfalls. There are some, not downfalls, there are some shortfalls to it, shortcomings to it. So, for example, like some of these angel investors, they say, oh, we're spending too much time on Twitter. Like, why don't you build the product? We're building the product. They say, like, oh, why are you fixated on design or fixated on this? Um, but it's very conscious on my part, right? It's a projection out into the world. I'm sending up the beacon for people to say, like, look here, come here, we're solving this problem, come join. And at the same time, it also stimulates these feedback loops, right? So it means I get to talk to more people. I get to pitch them on what we're thinking about doing. I get feedback on potential pathways we might go with the product. And it is closing the loop. It's increasing the speed. And so it's a meta experiment. And my history, and you made some jokes about it, and they're well founded. My history is in sort of keeping things close to the vest. Did that for 4 years, where every single day I just came in, and my job was not to talk to anyone in the press. My job was to do those 6 things on my whiteboard and nothing more. And if it meant that, you know, some journalist out there said that I was some like sock entrepreneur and totally, not qualified for some job or whatever, like that was the price you pay for being able to focus for an additional 3 hours, and you pay the price. So to make that mindset shift from that to this very open, like, hey, I'm going to project out into the world. I'm going to be very as open as I can be with people. Like, it's tough, but it's paying off.
It's a very interesting comparison that you make from your time at the White House to ignoring all that stuff and getting the 6 priorities done to changing the way that your antennas are oriented in order to just do the same thing that you want, which is achieve your goals. And it's a good lesson for people about your focus and your attention and your ability to identify what distractions are, and to push them away. Whereas going on Twitter for some, I say most people, is a distraction. And this is not a critique, right? This is just the nature of the thing. Is that it's a consumer oriented product. People scroll, they read. It's a distraction from their job that they're supposed to be doing during the day. Maybe like YouTube is. Who knows? But if you use it in a concentrated, focused way with an intention, it is a world changing tool. I have changed my life in unrecognizable ways over the last 5 to 7 years, a lot of things have happened, but Twitter is a tool that I have used to learn, to connect, to get feedback, to understand the world, to make sense of things, to build networks, to build connections. And as you say, when you start to put things out, things come back, and sometimes those cold inbounds are useless. Sometimes they're life changing, and that's happened to me. Uh, there are people there are people that we know that have reached out to me cold inbound, and I was like, well, who the hell is this guy? And it turns out, they form the relationships that have long lasting impact on me and on the world around us. So Twitter can be an extremely powerful tool. When you said something about building
And
and
the other
go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, and the other thing, Jack, that I just want to point out is like you also have. I think it's important, and you do this very well. Some of our friends do it very well. You have to also maintain that humility to continue talking to people who are open and curious. So I've opened DMs. People DM me all the time. I've got a little script that I use when I interact with them. But if they're willing to do the work, if they're willing to think, talk, read the books that you say, like you have to reward that because people that use these platforms to try and make themselves better, those are the people that have the ability to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. There as a mentee, the best thing that you can do with a mentor is to take their advice and put it into practice. Because if you
Like
put it in,
1% of people do that.
right, if you take the
1%.
advice that you get and put it into practice, and then you come back a day later, a month later, a year later, fucking 10 years later, and you're like, hey, bro, that thing you told me to do, I did it. Here's what happened. What do I do next? I guarantee you that mentor or potential mentor will give you more energy, will give you more time. There,
Yeah.
on a mundane-ish but personally important level for this guy out there, somebody once asked me, like, how do I lose weight? What do I do? And I was like, dude, just walk 2 miles every day and check back with me on Twitter every day. The guy's on like day 90 or something now of checking in with me every single day. And we have been tweaking what he's doing. He's lost like 30 some pounds. He's changed his life, changed his relationship with his wife. It's like, you know how many people DM me and ask me for shit and I tell them something and they never do anything? This guy took the most basic, simple advice, followed it, checked in, has stayed on point, and now I'm willing to give him all the attention and time that he wants or needs in order to move things forward. And you're absolutely right. This humility you're talking about is also works both ways. It's like, maybe I don't even know who this guy is, but he can teach me something. And so
Yeah.
you constantly have to have an open mind as to what's coming in the door, especially in this pseudonymous economy. You never know who you're talking to. You never know what's behind that avatar. And you really begin to judge people just on the interactions and the actions that you have in that real-time space. And that's a really powerful thing that people need to understand. These connections that you're going to make these days, there are entire startups that are done pseudonymously. There are entire
Yeah.
publications that are done pseudonymously. If you listen to Balaji, he'll tell you that the whole freaking economy is going to be done pseudonymously eventually. I'm not really good with that word just yet. Pseudonymously, the pseuds. And so you have to judge people on their actions, and the actions are the interactions, and there are the engagements. It's an interesting new approach that I was unfamiliar with coming up in just the normal world before social media and all of this. But there's two topics that you mentioned. I want to talk about what did you mean by building in public, and what did you mean by stored potential energy? That is a fascinating concept to me, because it sounds to me it's like structural items, right? Like tectonic plate items, not the top of the waves and water items. So take your pick on either one of those. Let's drill down on that.
Yeah, the building in public thing is sort of a meme that people are using in Silicon Valley to talk about the act of being very a startup that you may be building or a process that you're refining or creating. And and it's essentially what I'm doing, what we're doing with this company. Um, and the point that I'm making here is not that there's anything wrong with it. In fact, it's exactly what I'm doing. The point is, it's a reflection of the same generative function that drove Boyd and his acolytes and that drove the YC community and Facebook to this move fast and break things concept. It's this idea that you get information by seeking information, and you seek information as quickly as you can, and you integrate that as quickly as possible into your thinking and your doing. On the stored potential energy concept, it's just one of these sort of like heuristics that I think about. Stored potential energy is this simple concept, which is that right now I'm expending energy by lifting this watch up, distance. It took, one fraction of a kilocal to do that. And what it means is that, when I drop the item, the energy contained within that item impacts my hand when I catch it as force. So like stored potential energy is like when you carry a rock up a hill and then you drop it on the hill and it rolls down. Force that it has that has essentially been stored in that rock because you carried it up from sea level to 100 feet above sea level, and then you dropped it off the cliff and it impacted the sand below. That's stored potential energy. So when I think about big concepts, big abstract ideas, the search for stored potential energy is one that is just an idea that I sort of keep in my mind. Like, where are places where these like friction points that if you can release them, cause action very quickly or powerfully or in a very specific direction. I don't know what more to say about that.
No,
It's
I
like, it's
like it.
almost, it's like, yeah, it's really abstract.
I like it. I like it. You could think of, well, for me, in a real world application, for me, masculine energy is that potential stored energy in the universe, and I'm doing everything that I can to help push that rock of masculine energy. Well, I don't want to say over the cliff, but you know what I mean. Engage it in some
Yeah.
way where it has
Release the energy.
where it has a cascade effect. And it's a multiplier, So for me, unlocking masculine energy, I see it as a way to affect the change culturally and politically that I want to see in the world today. That I think we all on our side want to see. And to me, it is that it's a multiplier effect. And I suppose when you're in business, that's the kind of thing that you're really looking for. You're not looking to move the surface waves or just the little sea foam around. You want to be shifting the entire ocean over, but using a lever. And
Yeah.
I guess in your new, well, not so new, but in your latest endeavor here, industrial cybersecurity, you see the buildup of this accumulated energy in terms of risk, right? You see the
Yeah.
risk is building. Can you just explain a little bit more about the risk that you see there and like the problem a little bit more specifically that you guys are trying to solve, if you don't mind? Because your unique perspective gives you an insight into these huge tectonic forces that are working together and are grinding right now and just in search of one little thing to change in the entire landscape potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. So think about it this way. Kind of like a balance sheet for finance people out there. They'll probably get this and they'll probably say, oh, you're saying it wrong or something. I'm not a finance guy. You are, or you used to be. It's in your skill stack. So for many years, corporate cultures had this sort of lean Six Sigma mindset where what they were searching for, and I think this is a good thing, by the way, was increased efficiency, increased uptime, increased accuracy, 5 nines of precision, they'd say. This is lean Six Sigma stuff, business stuff. Essentially, it means that like when I conduct a process that's supposed to achieve a specific and measurable outcome, again, people may say that's not the definition, but from what I understand it, when I conduct a process that has a specific outcome that I can measure and identify, I want it to perform that action that produces that outcome out of like 10,000 times. You want it to happen 9,999 times out of 10,000. And that's your error rate or whatever. Maybe it's larger, maybe it's like 100,000. But the point, corporate operational cultures were driving towards this level of precision and predictability because it lowers costs, it increases your ability to scale. And in the pursuit of that, what we did was we digitized many of these processes that used to be done by humans because we said, oh, the human, um, you know, 9,999 times they turn the dial to the right number. And then sometimes we have someone that's tired or they're 10 minutes left in their shift and their mind's not focused on it and they get a little bit wrong and it causes a small error. And so we've injected digital systems into the entire industrial world, and people are just starting to realize this, and it is just starting to become apparent that so are malicious actors. And so you see things happen. There's a brewery that that went down. Molson Coors Brewery went down for days, if not weeks, earlier this year. A meatpacking plant, a water treatment facility that nearly started churning out poisonous water in Florida. These are all little warning signs that are happening right now. We're seeing that these systems, which are not, I don't want to say that they're not well protected, of these operational communities inside these companies are very much focused on it's got to work 100% of the time. And so I can just tell you, having the background that I've had, that these problems are compounding and they're increasing. It's going to be this like short squeeze where all of a sudden it's going to be really clear that a bunch of these commercial infrastructures, critical infrastructure, need to be protected in a way that they've never been protected before, and in many ways haven't even been engineered in order to enable them to be protected. And so that's what I'm talking about stored potential energy. We thought we were buying down risk. Or sorry, we thought we were buying down, we thought that we were increasing optimization. What we were really doing was like, it was a long-term loan that we were taking out. And that loan's coming due, and people don't understand that. And so we're building a company right there.
It sounds to me that your thesis has, I'm not going to say fear in it, but sees huge risk, compounded risk, stored risk, risk that has been injected into every element of our industrial society, which, by the way, is what heats and feeds and protects us, right? So this is not a non-trivial. This is non-trivial here.
Yeah.
Did you take away before you went to the White House and after you came out? Did you come back with a higher elevated sense of risk for this for our industry? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's disheartening in some ways. It's a little worrisome. A little worrisome that when you finally get inside and hear all the information and talk to the people in charge and see how the policies work and see the big picture in practice, that it increases your worry. I would see in the future here that malicious actors potentially are seeing this as well. So I guess it seems obvious, but I'll ask you, I mean, the opportunities for malicious actors are increasing across the board, not decreasing when it comes to, say, industrial sabotage, infrastructure sabotage, logistics sabotage, etc. Yes?
I would direct readers to what's called the annual threat assessment that gets submitted by the intelligence community to Congress that talks about this. It's an unclassified product of the U.S. intelligence community. It talks pretty extensively in an unclassified fashion about these types of threats and how pervasive they are.
Yeah. As our political environment continues to churn, I can imagine there are people looking for what you said were asymmetric outcomes. It seems to me that this stored potential energy of negative outcomes in the industrial space is one of those areas of risk that smart bad guys are probably taking a very hard look at. So anybody out there, if you got a business that involves computers basically connected to the internet in any way, you've bought yourself a whole giant steaming pile of risk. And before that thing explodes in your face, you might want to take a look at what Joshua here is doing. Go to his Twitter page, read his papers, go to his Substack, Steinman.substack. Joshua Steinman is the @ on Twitter. Joshua, you've been in the military, you've been in the White House and administration, you've advised the president, you've interacted with the agencies and officials and countries from all over the world, you've interacted with industrial leaders and commercial leaders from America and all over the world as well. You've been trained up in a lot of areas. You're a vet from this, a vet from that, a vet from this. What have you synthesized, my friend? What have you synthesized at this point that feels like it's new, or something that you've learned, or what your style has evolved into? How have this all compounded to make the new Joshua Steinman? And just share a little bit of that for our listeners so that they can gain some insights from your experience.
It all comes down to people that are willing to take risks and take initiative. Everything comes down to that. Like, people, I went to a training course once, and again, won't go into detail. Essentially, they were putting the students, they put us through an incredible amount of stress, and then confronted us with a bunch of sort of gibberish. And at the end of the course, they asked us, "Did you see a pattern in this information that was presented to you?" And most people raised their hands. I did not, but most people raised their hands. And what they said was that the human mind wants to see patterns everywhere, wants to see order everywhere, wants to see a guiding hand everywhere, and cannot handle the chaos. And what you must take away from that is that at the end of the day, it's people driving almost everything. And lots of folks want there to be some shadowy cabal or good cabal or this or that. Really, it's just people taking action. And that can be both disheartening to some, but heartening to others. And I hope it's heartening to your listeners, to the people that are listening to us talk right now, because what it means is you can intelligently start experimenting and acting and taking steps to improve your life. And once you've done that, improve other people's lives. And you literally will have a positive impact. You can actually affect these things. On the door to my office in my White House office, and I gave this to every person that came to work for me. I had this line from this movie, and I grew up in the CT counterterrorism world, so it's a great film. Not going to say anything else about whatever's going on right now, but it's this film called Zero Dark 30, and the manager gathers the Bin Laden hunting unit team in a room. It's dramatized. I don't know if this ever happened in real life. He says, "Listen up, people. There's no working group coming to the rescue. There's no task force on some other floor. It's just us." Printed that out, put it to the door. Last thing I looked at every single night. Made sure it was up in every single one of my people's cubicles so that they looked at it every single day. If you don't like what you see happening in the world, it's up to you to make it better. It's up to you to make yourself better, to make your family better, make your children better, make your colleagues better, start something new that makes the world better. We've got friends that have, been under a lot of created movies, books. You did this. You wrote a book. And it was because you saw something and you said, "I'm going to take action." And the whole world is like that. I won't get into details, but there are major policy initiatives that we did under the last administration that, I kid you not, were like me and two members of my team sitting in the office, and we were like, what, we should really do X. And you go out, and we got authorization for it, and sure enough, it has a cascading positive reaction on things. And that's the story. That's the story of the world. It's the story of history. And so understanding that and not allowing people to make you think nothing you can ever do about it, like, just sit back and, you know, eat the bugs and watch the TV screen or something. Don't do it. The world is out there. It's an amazing place.
Joshua, I really appreciate that, man. It is such a great sentiment. It's one thing that people forget. My mom oftentimes says, "Oh, history will work itself out in the end." Mom, men, people, women have to take action in order for history to work itself out in the end. And when you finally get to the point where you look around and you realize that there is no cavalry coming, there is no special task force that you're talking about, there is no one else who's working on this, and if you want to make the change, you got to do it. It is at once terrifying and empowering, because I guess it has to be kind of like when your dad dies, which, gratefully hasn't happened to me just yet, where you realize, man, I really am on my own. I'm on my own. There's no one there to save me. There's no one there to help me. There's no one there to even guide me in that way anymore. You just got to go for it, man. You just got to go for it. And all the concepts that we've talked about today, personnel is policy, personnel is productivity, personnel is profitability, personnel is your entire thing. The reservoirs of stored up energy, action to orient, OODA, the OODA, all these things, when you combine them into a coherent personal philosophy, you get somebody like Joshua Steinman here, who's had impact on the world that will go on beyond his time in the White House and beyond his days. And hopefully with this new project that you're starting here and this new startup, you can prevent some tragedies out there in the world and make some money along the way, by the way, guys. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, Joshua, I really appreciate you taking this time and talking to me. I know I've learned a lot. I know that my audience has learned a lot. We're going to chop this bad boy up to all these little bits of wisdom that you dropped, and we're going to blast them out all over the internet over the next few weeks and months here too. So I appreciate that. Thanks so much for taking the time. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I held off and I waited, and here we are, and it was worth the wait, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on. Just thanks, dude.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for being a guy that rogered up and, did it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I'm trying to inspire others to do that. You've inspired me in much the same way. Guys, go out there and take some action. Gals, do the same. Did I just say gals? Women, do the same thing. What am I, boomer? Do the same thing. Just take action. Get out there and make change. And if you even don't know where you're going, that's fine. Just start. Aim for that fuzzy picture and just go. It will become higher resolution as you take action. And that is really the key to all of this. Joshua, tell everybody where they can find you so that they can glean some more of this wisdom and watch your very public display of starting a new company.
Yeah. So it's at Joshua Steinman, my full name, Twitter. And then, Substack is Steinman, just my last name, .substack.com. Super simple. And I'm out there. DMs are open. Feel free to, if you want the reading list, I'll send along the. So,
what books do you recommend, sir? That's the number one question that we all get. So, absolutely, 100%, guys. I am Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live Show. If you're interested in all these things we've been talking about, hit subscribe. Send this to your friends. Share it. Help us beat the algorithm. They're suppressing this stuff. Send the links. Post it to Twitter. Send the podcast to your friends. Tell your mom and dad about it. And men, if you're interested in masculinity, brotherhood, and sovereignty, and you like what we're talking about, and this complete body of work in the Liminal Order speaks to you, come join me in the Liminal Order. That's liminal-order. Our next membership window is the first Monday of September. I believe that's the 5th or 6th. Get on the wait list and come join us. We are changing the world one step at a time, one man at a time, and we're having a lot of good success. So thank you very much, Joshua. Thank you very much for coming on. Thank you, everybody in the chats. And until the next time, we're out. On this show, we're driven by curiosity. want to chart a path forward. Best people, best conversations. We're on a journey and it's just getting started.